Welcome everybody to the seventh session of Reenacting Archives. I'm very happy to welcome Eva Meyer-Keller today. As usual, hello Eva.
Hello.
As usual, in a different place than me, like always those days. Eva is in Berlin. Me, I'm in the north of Germany, so this time we are in one country. That's kind of unusual. So I'm really happy to have you here, Eva. And in fact, we know each other for quite a while. You already have also given a workshop in the department in ARC, and there could be so. In many ways, or could be in many ways related to an idea of reenacting and moreover reenacting archives actually. But I think we could start with the very first work of yours, I think, that I have discovered, at least, which is a kind of violent piece of torturing cherries, very beautiful violin piece called Death is Certain. I think you are still performing it, but I think you can talk a little bit about the current state of it. I'm not sure whether it makes sense maybe to show a little
let's
video
watch
before, or you want to speak first?
Let's watch it now. Let's just watch talk more about what we see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's do that. what we see is already the reenactment of a reenactment.
Exactly. So yes, so this happened this summer last year. I mean, you could already see with the masks. This was not an official, like a public showing. It was for 10 people or something. And yes, and in Corona times, I taught Death is Certain to my own children, and they performed it as a
like we are used to in Germany that violence is transferred from generation to generation. In fact.
Yeah, so no generational healing, but rather the opposite. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's an incredible work. I avoided in the beginning to say, because I think usually you are introduced as an artist working between visual arts, filmmaking, and performance, or something like that. I thought, like, yeah, okay, there is an evidence in it, but also it's not just, you moving between these three or more, of course, fields, but there's something really, really instrumental there, I think, no, in the way how a process that you do, like, for example, there's a certain sort of spans between those different versions. Also, I know from There's a Certain, there has been a performance version, there has been a version of recorded, like a performance recording version, and there has been also a kind of screening, more cinematic version, no?
Well, in there, you see when there's my hands is in this little excerpt that you saw now, and these are excerpts of a video version that I've made.
Yes.
But this piece is already 2000. It's made in 2002, so it's older than my children. And I performed it before I had them, and I performed it while I was pregnant. I still do it myself also. I will do it again soon in Zurich. And also in very different contexts. And it's also not like, because you say it's a very violent piece, it's not really true, because I'm actually playing with fruit and everyday objects. But it's what's happening in the imagination and in the projection. And and now,
sorry. No, but
I mean, it's also because now I'm working on a new project where I am working on perception. And and so at the time, one of the starting points was that I wanted to do something where the audience needed to be active and start to project on think that our sensory organs, like the eyes and ears and hands and touch, is a window to the world. At least that's what I, in some ways, thought before. So it's a bit like, a window. I can perceive what's out there, and it's not. That's not how it is. We perceive with the brain, and the brain has this thing of it can't be in a state of not knowing. So what it does is that before it needs to already project onto what's out there immediately with something that it has had in the past, some experience that it has already, like we already have experienced. And from this conditioning and from these memories and experiences, we jump onto immediate conclusions. We can't help ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I was interested in that piece always, is the fact, and in your work in general, but as we showed this one for the moment, I think it's very evident for listeners and viewers of this, is the fact that in fact, if we talk about something being reenacted or enacted or actualized there as an image, or even as you say, as a gesture of violence, it's actually the mental realization of it. So it's the spectator is kind of not only actively collaborating on putting this in place, but actually is the place where this happens. So this is like, I think it's quite interesting that this and this is of course what you say, it's a projection. I mean, we cannot not predict the future, because we need to process only the difference of what we expect, otherwise we would explode inside out. And on the other side, of course, what we see is always, in a certain sense, what we have already seen. No, and I think this is quite beautiful, I feel, in this gesture, to pass this piece to your children, who are, as you say, who have not even been born when this piece was first performed, which referred already to images that were already in the heads of the spectators. I mean, this is also the impossibility you put somebody in, I think, and the fact that this space that is constructed through such a piece in the actual performance, which we cannot see, of course, in the video as much as it happens in the space, but it's a kind of impossible space. You don't know where you should put yourself there, because what's happening is what you don't want to happen, and it's something that happens in your head, in a certain sense, while you are doing a very playful dispositif that just gives an occasion to project somehow, silently. So I think this is quite, for me, it's quite interesting in that piece, because also I think you could always say these images, and this is maybe a question, how you think about it, but you
I also wonder, I mean, I'm just wondering, I don't know the answer, but with what I'm learning right now, also with, like mentioned, the neuroscience, is that we need to remember the bad things, because they're crucial to our survival. So, I mean, when there was like I don't know, like a stick or a hole, and we needed to run away from the tiger, we needed to know that we can stumble here, and because if we fall, then we're dead. That's a bit as simple as that goes. And so I guess images of violence are maybe wired in a way that we recognize them very easy. I don't know that. It's probably a question I will ask to my neuroscientist.
No, it might be true. Or let's say maybe images of, in any case, of strong emotional affection. No? I think like images of violence, because I think in another piece of yours, like we didn't say we would talk about this, but now I'm also thinking about cooking catastrophes and so on, where you work with the images, with catastrophic images that we are kind of used to through the news or through other channels of image distribution, and that also they stay as a sort of living imprint in our mental construction, and the piece proposes a reactivation of this also, in a sense. And of course, I mean, this is one thing, I think, and okay, that's one aspect. I think the other aspect, to me, it seems that, well, evidently you do this with very sort of unguilty, do you say unguilty? I don't know, materials, a cherry or some cooking stuff, like whatever, kitchen things. So it puts an emphasis on the fact, on one side, on the fact that we project, because a cherry is, you're not showing a human being tortured or an animal or something, you're showing a fruit. but on the other hand, it also adds a narrative. No, it adds a point to the story somehow, and this I feel maybe with later works it becomes even more strong somehow.
Yeah,
as a
with
notion, maybe.
later works, this discrepancy is quite important of the very ordinary everyday and the extraordinary events, or the very ungraspable idea or something.
Yeah, and I mean there's also I mean, of course, if we talk about there's a certain or cooking catastrophes in a certain way also, but maybe most strongly with there's something extremely spectacular, or at least playing with the extremely spectacular there. While actually in the performance is interesting. This is quite a difference has been always for me between the performance and the video version, because in the video version, of course, because it's a film, it's it plays very much with this immersion and with coming close to you and so on. While actually the performance, there's also something very sort of almost polite or small, or like very, well, in any case very precise, but also little actually in the action, that is kind of contrasting, I think, with the spectacular event. But then you have done other works, and I think that, for example, this other work we want to talk about, Ordinator, for example, it's a work that goes quite away from this sort of spectacular notion, and it goes much more into a playful setup, almost a joke, not really. Sorry, yes, but
yeah. I mean, a last one to Death is Certain is also, when you see it live, the smell is very distinct. So there's like the burning of the ironing of the cherry, or the burning of it becomes very distinct. And there's this one where I lighted deodorant spray, and there's different smells. So for me, performing it like this, there's a very specific smell to this show. And the other thing is that the people are standing around each other, and so they see each other's reactions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that is also quite interesting, because we do come with a different baggage of knowledge and memories and books we've read and news we know, and history and facts, and this is what we project onto it. So the murder we've seen in a film or in a book, and so for example, let's say a 6-year-old child who might watch this piece, or a 60-year-old man, or they project other things onto it.
Yeah, and I think there are many dimensions to it. When you think about this seeing the other, seeing the piece also, it means that the other sees you also seeing the piece. And it's kind of, I think with this one, there's really a game about this also. So if I'm talking about this impossible place to take, it's a kind of impossible place to take towards the action, but it's also an impossible place to take in terms of an observer position, or being observing at the same time. And it's quite, I think in most setups you left it quite free also, how people could move. And it's actually very, very complicated in this piece, how you place your own body. It's really weird. It's like and it's not only because you are observed and because you are at the same time in this very voyeuristic position, but it's also because of this multiplied game of projection, because our faces, they also project, of course, if we look at something, and there's an amplification somehow of this weirdness. That has to do very much, I think, with the physicality of the body, where we put ourselves, and what is a safe place, in this kind of situation somehow. Yeah, close or further away, or
or if you should laugh or be quiet or something.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think it's really, but of course, it's with this one. I think it's interesting. I think I also said that I think with later pieces, it's somehow less. I mean, it's putting more in the center. Maybe this notion of the narrative, or the sort of layering and contradiction and sort of dysfunctioning or different functioning between different narratives, than this notion of voyeurism. Now, I think this is something that in there's a certain somehow is quite present, or because of the subject, but also because of this weird sort of representation intimacy relation. And I feel with some, but okay, let's talk about this when we get to the other works.
Should we look at Ordinator also? That's also, it's from the same time. It's also from around 2002. And it's a collaboration with my friend and colleague Uta Eisenreich, who is a visual artist living in Amsterdam. And a fantastic artist, I think. And yes, so what we tried, I mean, it explains itself when we watch it.
Let's watch the video.
Ordinator. DigiArt was a Danish festival that was busy with the use of digital techniques in stage art. On the floor of the studio, Uta and me made a drawing that was related to the organizational structures of computers. We took Martin Nachbar with us as our assistant. We simulated a hard drive together with everybody in this studio. Each individual had her own task. Martin interviewed the people from the public and assigned them to suitable functions within the system. I introduced the people to their individual tasks. Stuff It Expander takes out all objects from the bags and pockets of the participants and marks them. The file makers make an inventory of all those things. The screen makers paint the mirrors white with buttermilk so that we can project onto it. Virus is the big enemy. He can paralyze individual functions so that the whole system is affected. Dr. Norton can reactivate the paralyzed functions. File Repair collects broken objects and repairs them. Trash Can collects all rubbish. Waffle Burner bakes and distributes waffles. The people that don't get any functions become users and can do two things. They can call the functions via dial-up and give them orders, or they can, via chat room, communicate with the outside world, the cafe or the street. Everybody had to be ready with its task in 1 hour, then a photo was taken.
I'm a file maker, so I just order the things in those groups that they belong to, so we can find them again.
And could you name some of the groups?
Yes, we have, for example, here we have a group that's called cigarettes.
Right.
And we have lighters, could be put together with the matches up here, but we have discussed that, and we make one for lighters and one for matches because it's easier. Try this under water. We have right now 3 of them.
So you also count them?
Oh yes, we have to count them because we'll have to know how much free space we have on our file here.
All right.
I'm sorry, I'm just following orders. Generally, my task is file repair service, and I have cleaned or repaired all of the objects here. I've cleaned that. And so, yeah, I've cleaned that mobile phone. There was a little hole in this jacket, so I'm just sewing it. I've sharpened that pencil. That radio was detuned, so I've tuned that in.
I think you're now infected by the virus, and you're going to stand on hvide blodlegemer chair, tell Dr. Norton, but I don't tell them because I'm not stupid.
You don't tell. My job is to win 4 in a row, so I can go out with my medicine, this, and give to the different kinds of persons that are on chairs to get them down, because virus has whispered something in the area.
Freaking his ass off.
I'm working on it.
Have it back. Maybe you should consult.
We could be a processor. I mean, we got a lot of inputs coming in. We're processing it and we're producing some output. This output is then going out in the system. And what happens then, I really don't know.
It was the chat room.
And what did you do as the chat room?
I connected users to the outside world.
And did it work?
Yes.
Was the outside world willing to connect to the
Yes.
inside world? What did they do?
They had a flirt going on, of course. It's a chat room.
Sort of.
It's
So it's a funny place inside the computer.
Still find it quite funny. I mean, also the computer in the year 2002 was quite a different thing, and mobile phones, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
were
it's- yeah. It seemed still a bit easier to access the inside of the computer at this time, maybe in a certain sense. At least for Mac users, it was easier at this time. But now, but I think it's it's interesting, because of course we also in the 20th century we with this sort of ever overtaking idea of cybernetics in all kinds of parts of life, including universities and everything, where you started to basically analyze almost any structure that you would find like it was a computer system. In fact, it's like a funny gesture to turn this around in 2002. And to reenact the computer, in a sense, or enact it, I don't know. But how long did you perform that, actually?
We only did it once. We did a test version in Berlin, and then this is in Denmark. Also, it was a digital art festival, and I got invited, and I thought, like, why? I mean, why would I get invited to a digital art festival? And so we took this as a starting point. And Uta is actually a photographer, so the photo that was taken in the end, we didn't really succeed, unfortunately, but our attempt or wish was to photograph it so it would look like the desktop with these little icons, and that the fields that you could see, like that we taped, they were taped like, no, they were taped like this. So actually, if the camera would film it, they would then become squares on 2-dimensional. So it had this 2-3-dimensional thing going on. And of course, basically the piece was all about coordinating, writing manuals for each program or function.
Yeah, it's funny. So you would call that digital arts? No.
Yeah.
Yes, kind of your way of digital art, actually. But it's fun, because in fact, of course, it relates to a lot of things, but with this idea to construct an order system that, of course, with the kind of human function, the human action in it is always on the edge or already exploding while you put it in place, basically, or shifting away, however. It kind of reminds also and this is I think it's something that for me is actually a bit related to this idea of reenactment, in fact. And it's something that normally I put this not as a subject, in those talks, but I think it's something that just now comes to my mind, and that in fact is a bit related to that for me, is this idea of the tacit and the explicit knowledge, this idea of how an order system that you put in place is able to be verbalized or not and in how far the one thing maybe that is sort of absolutely and structurally not possibly verbalized, called kind of tacit knowledge, is the kind of social relation of human beings. You know, it's something where this always has to dysfunction, you know, because it's something dynamic, and it's something that is never fixable. I think it's a kind of interesting game in that piece, and it's a bit related for me to some idea of reenactment, that in fact when you put this order system, something appears on the surface that you cannot even hold back, and this becomes the kind of narrative in a certain sense, you know, the humor or the whatever, the shifting of but it's nice, huh? It's a nice piece. And so we come later to another kind of digital art. Actually, what you did, no, it's not this. You wouldn't call digital art at all, and I agree to it actually, but it's at least a piece that works with an idea of an online archive. But before we get there, maybe
yes, we look at the other excerpts. So the next suggestion was an excerpt out of Some Significance, a group piece I made in 2017 or 8, yes, and there we worked with models in natural science and mostly physics, and ideally with models that we cannot see. I mean, from things we cannot see, like atoms. And atom has also like a history of models. So first it was like the smallest unit, and then it was, anyway. So this is the planetary atom model. And so let's just have a look for a few minutes. Let's not watch the whole thing, but a few minutes.
You can stop, I guess.
Yeah.
Eva, the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement.
The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement.
But the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth.
But the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth.
Eva, essentially, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Essentially, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I will come to the room, back again, towards the garage.
Sheena, an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Annegret, this is creepy because you cannot see any regularity.
This is
creepy.
Creepy.
Because you cannot see any regularity.
Because you cannot see any regularity.
Sheena, you never fail until you stop trying.
You never stop feeling until you stop trying.
You never fail until you stop trying.
You never feel until you stop trying.
Eva, we simply want to gain more control.
We simply want to gain more control. You're very long, Annegret.
Annegret, any intervention by the observer to see the particle will disturb its motion.
Any intervention by the observer to see the particle will
disturb its motion.
Disturb its motion.
Sheena, a fiction is not an argument.
A fiction is not an argument.
All right. If you want to introduce the piece a bit more, maybe you want to say a few things.
Yeah, I mean, as you could see, we were 4 performers, and we were working on like these models, and we are repeating quotes. So these texts that we are saying are quotes from the research that we've done, and they're from quite famous people like Niels Bohr or each other, or the Alexander Kamele, by the way, who was
a good friend of mine.
Yes.
Yes.
Who is a physicist, and he was the advisor for this piece. So we checked the physics with him and other stuff. But yes, he was our physics specialist.
Yeah, and he always has been interested also in the frictions of those models. No, I remember we discussed a lot in the past, and I think it's quite an interesting subject, and how far the model or the thought experiment in relation to some sort of material that is used is sort of intrinsically already something that that deals with a sort of foreign materiality of something, with another object that comes from another context, from another scale, from another logic of thought or logic of storytelling, if you want so, and that gets introduced in a thought that is in itself maybe very abstract or incomprehensible or inaccessible to us. I remember that I was reading about early chemical models and how the fact that they had to be built in wood heavily influenced the sort of abstract thinking on how these structures would combine, in a thought that had nothing to do with wood at the end. It was a formula. Yeah. So I think that's quite interesting, and I think you play a lot with that.
I mean, I don't think that physicists would necessarily use apples and tides to
probably not
demonstrate the planetary atom model, but that's exactly why we did it. And the apple was kind of the fruit of the piece, because often I have like one, I don't know, it's not that it doesn't start with that necessarily, but there's often one fruit or vegetable. And I think for the next one, it might be cauliflower.
Nice, a beautiful one.
Yes. But also like physics is a very like that was also another thing. It's very clean, like how it communicates itself in a way out to the world, and it's quite abstract. And if it's concrete, it's extremely expensive. So it's like this hydro collider or like these massive instruments that they're building, and they're not very accessible. And also that we were 4 women was a thing, because it's still physics is very male dominated. And so that was also another aspect that we played on.
Yeah, I remember seeing actually I've never seen the actual performance, but I saw one of the late rehearsals, I remember, in Berlin. But and I remember when seeing it, I noticed that, I mean, you are in fact reenacting scientific experiments, if you want so. But the notion of like what they are is quite different within the performance. There's this kind of example, like the one with the apples, that I think for me is connected very much with this, what we talked about, this porosity of different narratives that sort of clash and produce something else. But then there have been also other sort of moments with this plane surface, for example, where it becomes very sort of magic and very in fact quite spectacular in terms of the visuality, or the fact that you feel, oh wow, there's a kind of natural force, imprinting on an image that That's for me. It's two quite different things, and I found quite interesting in this performance that you really collide them, or you brought them together, kind of on one table.
Yeah, this scene that you describe is we are having a loudspeaker, and you see it from above with the camera. Which films this and projects it quite big, and the screen is though hanging on top of our heads, so you only see our hands, which we thought of, like the laboratories are not really accessible. So then you and what is in this speaker is washing powder pearls, of course, and it's like our is it a wave or a particle scene? And so we're having all these moments of moving washing powder pearls and stuff. And in the end, now that the thought is, because we're the one thing, and this is kind of an exception in general how I work, is we do actually reenact a real experiment, because this is not real experiments. This is a kind of
chamber
translation and game, and with this discrepancy and so on. And in the end, we couldn't resist, because it was just too great to do. We do the cloud chamber.
The cloud chamber,
yeah. And that is actually a real experiment that Charles Thomson Rees Wilson received a Nobel Prize for in the 20s sometime. And but there also, because it's in a box, and so we have this dry ice and this alcohol mix, and there's these water pearls, and it makes with the bare eye visible the traces of the beta and alpha particles.
Mm-hmm.
And but there also but there we make the situation that it is an experiment, and we don't actually know if it's really going to work and if it's going to happen. We have some experience, we try our best, we redo the conditions. It's never quite the same. And here we as performers and the audience, we become the same role, so we're both waiting. And so it's about waiting what will happen in months.
No, but this is interesting, because I think in these last, it makes me think that in these last performances of yours that I saw, there's somehow this friction that you have in something like there's a certain between the cherry, the like non-problematic object, so to speak, and the violence that is sort of applied to it. It translates into something else. It translates into a kind of performativity of the mistake or the unpredictable, like something where, in the reenactment gives you a form, or the structure of the experiment sort of provides you a form that allows you to fail somehow, or that at least keeps the possibility of failing open, which creates a kind of tension, and the failure itself, it becomes the performance. I mean, the thing that happens on the fringes of this experiment, because the experiment itself, in this case, for example, of the cloud chamber, it's extremely fascinating, of course, but then it stays quite hermetic in its fascination as a performance, in my view. But what sort of crystallizes around it in this sort of, to make it possible, but also this possibility that it actually won't happen and we won't see something and stuff like that, that creates a kind of very an unsharpness, or a kind of moment that sort of allows for this other sort of narrative to
And then again, there we also reenact the traces of the of alpha and beta particles, because there's this is actually my favorite scene in the piece, which is very difficult to show on video because you don't see anything, is where we open the doors and the windows in the theater, and then we have these these light beams that shine through the theater, but they don't reflect off anything. And then we go with salt in a package, and then we throw these lines of salt in light beams, and they, for us, are this reenactment of how these How these traces in the light in the cloud chamber looks like.
And how do you see it's really a question for curiosity, is that it has nothing to do with our subject here, but how do you see the position of the performance in those of the audience in those last pieces, of the spectators, like because there is a change, like there is the when I see, for example, in the first pieces, even the two that you show here, of course, okay, the ordinator one, it plays also with this funny interactivity thing, but it's a different, okay, but then for the other one, this spectator position is highly problematic or highly in question somehow. I feel with something like insignificance, for example, it's like the audience position, it might be as articulated, but it stays frontal. I mean, it stays like, okay, in a safe place. It stays with you are doing something, and would you call it an image? I don't know. It's interesting. If we talk about models, we are also talking about mental images, no? In a certain sense.
Yeah, but I think also the audience has a lot to do there. I mean, even if they're sitting on their chair quite traditionally, it's also like because the pieces have become longer and the setup has become so and then there was, I don't know. I mean, I actually don't think that when the audience sits on the chairs watching, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No, it was more the question that I have is more like, what is this position of the audience that you see there? I mean, okay, it's a frontal situation, but I completely agree with you. If you say this in itself, it says nothing. It has.
I think it's a good place to be able to because there's something with like, okay, so they're really in like the ways of watching this piece. I mean, with some significance. I think some physics students of Alexander came actually, although he didn't expect them to. And they did come up later, because also later when the cloud chamber is running, the audience can go down on stage and they can look into the chamber, and then they can also see it on screen, and people start talking on stage. And so for them it was very funny to have like this access through physics, but a lot of other people didn't have that because they don't have that knowledge, or they don't care, and so they're more from theater or anything else, and then they have another access into it. And so sometimes people can perceive this a bit more dreamlike, or they start of other things and they have other associations, but it has a thread that and I think this happens more even with living matters, with a piece that comes after. So after some significance that dealt with models in physics, I went from there to the smallest unit, living unit, which is a cell. So we went to cell biology, still very small and also ungraspable. And then the people I work with affect the piece a lot. So so the scientists, also Alexander had a lot of input. His input was a bit different, because we would try and do something like with the ideas of physics, and then he would see it and he would see something totally entirely else. And then after a while we experimented around, and then we showed him something, and then he would project something of physics onto what we were doing. It was like, but that looks like that. And then we were like, oh, great. So it was this in both ways, projecting on stuff. And but he also was a very bright, he was up for that. And
I mean, he also has a background in performance himself in certain ways, so it's different maybe, but yeah.
And then with the biology lab that I was working with, that was a whole lab. So I got to know all of the postdocs that were doing their research, and the laboratory itself, Simone Reber Laboratory, they were working with the spindle, which is when the cell divides. There's different phases of cell division, and the DNA forms chromosomes at some point, and then they add up in the middle, and then microtubules, they attach, and then there's the centrosomes, and at some point they pull it apart, and then they become two cells. And the spindle, this formation, when these attach on the chromosomes, this is what they were working with, and so so the piece became a lot about exactly that. And so the example shows one of our mitosis, which
maybe we can just watch.
Yeah, we can watch that one. He's ready with the Living Matters video. All right. So this doesn't actually show what I wanted to talk about, but because I mean the whole, I don't know, you remember these things lying on the floor? They're attached to belts, and so the whole set of the stage can be pulled apart. And so the whole piece is not like some significant little scenes. I mean, little scenes. There's one scene after the other. We are vertical. We carry things, and so we're much more human in that sense. And in that piece, we never get up. So so we never get above the sitting height. And if we are transporting anything, we lie down and we slide on our backs. And this for like nearly 1.5 hours. And we are like basically what the cell does is it rearranges itself constantly, everything inside. And so this is what we do in the piece as the big dramaturgy. So we are rearranging all that stuff over time into new formations of cell division.
But this is quite interesting. I mean, this is in a certain sense, it really gives an answer also to what I was asking before to the other piece. It's for me, I mean, that was what I was thinking, that this kind of frontality and something like a physical experiment, it has also again a different function, in the sense of, because I think if we talk about reenactment in what you are doing, we are always talking about this mental reenactment. I mean, it's evidently always about this sort of narrative that we create when we look at it somehow. So there is this sort of frontality, but then here you have this other frontality, but it's one that actually, it's like more the view through the microscope or something. It's like we look on, through this sort of body enactment, you turn our view basically still sort of flat, but on top of things. So what we see is a very different kind of movement. And I think it's quite important because this maybe we didn't even mention, but those pieces, they are serially constructed. You see them also as a series of different games or different ways to deal with those scientific experiments.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot to ask or to talk about. I was also thinking about animations that I had seen where they experimented with just little squares and triangles and stuff that were moving around in a random way on a white surface, and how you would always construct narrative into those movements, like complex sort of social narrative into those really randomly created movements of abstract figures, basically. Where I think it's something that I also would like to put in relation to what you do, but now I would just throw this on the table. We don't have the time to really discuss it. In fact, but I think it's a very particular way to sort of to work not on reenactment, but to work on the occasion of a reenactment that actually takes place in the mental setup of the spectator, and to mess up things in order to do so.
And to make them actually somehow feel it, so that there's this way of that's also why it's often I would say my like in general what I do, I want it to be accessible, and I want it not to be very but it is not, it is always, there's some dryness or some effort or some curiosity that the person watching needs to do a step towards, so it invites to somehow become part of. Also why it's not over pushed with like super atmospheric music or something, like, which could be also, it's easy to do because the impulse to do it, to make these images go bigger. But there's something that in the very end made me decide to, no, let's not do this. Let's keep it really clean. And then the whole rearrangement, which looks like transition, but it's not, because it's the main part of the piece, has music actually. Comes this choreography.
Yeah, of course it needs to. Well, it's at the end, this is all. I think it's all about leaving gaps that sort of activate this perception that you need, in fact, to construct this, no, to construct not only it as a piece, but actually even as the very material you are working with there, I guess. I mean, but it's interesting because, of course, this kind of activity, I'm just looking at the time and parallel.
Yes.
So
So
I don't want to finish, even if we are already over time, without just pointing to a last a project we want to talk about, which is your a website, an online platform project, you call it, I don't know, the Scores of Matter. And I think it's quite interesting because it's in a certain sense, it's kind of, it's, I don't know whether I could say it's driving this to an extreme, or it's putting it, it's like a cooking book of what you are doing in a certain sense. Now it's really, for me, it's a very interesting object, this website. If we talk about the idea of how you create order, in order to create disorder, in order to get lost, in order to, build a network of references that somehow gets more complex than what you can easily frame. But maybe you can introduce the website a little bit, just as a last sort of outlook, and then we will share the link and people can get lost themselves.
So this was an invitation of the Dynamic Archive, which is initiated by the art school in Bremen. And so anyway, they already do a dynamic archive. And so that was also a little mistake. I kind of misunderstood. So what is a dynamic archive for me? And I thought they asked me to make my version of that. And so this is actually has turned out to be a much bigger project than it was intended to be. But I then got so fascinated with the idea that I thought I'd pull it through anyway. So then, so here the starting point was 100 everyday objects that I've used in the last 20 years in my performances. And they're very common things like a glass and a spoon and tape and cables and a lamp and a hammer and stuff. So, and here we are ordering them into different categories. And at the moment we can see that we are in rooms. And so these objects are here in the kitchen. The cursor is now in the kitchen. And to the right, yes, is the storage. And there's a bedroom and a playroom and a bathroom. And so that's where you would, an office. So that's where you would find those objects. And then if you click on one of them, then you get a story. And this one doesn't, there's a description. And these stories are taken from all sorts of sources that I have collected in the last 20 years, taken out of my diary, taken out of rehearsal texts, like notes, texts from performances, research, quotes from other writers, emails, quotes from friends. So it's many voices, very, very many voices. Also this thing of that I'm not alone. I'm working a lot with other people. And
so this relation is very crucial now between the what is the relation of those texts, of these additional sort of links or information, and at the same time of the images of the objects, no? Because I don't know. It's interesting. I think that if you navigate the page, and of course that's difficult to see now in this version, but I really recommend people to navigate it themselves. But I think if you navigate this page, you have the feeling that you are in a constant shift of categories, basically, and of categories of relation also between the different materials. So not just that, you discover different materials, of course, and you know, but it's also that the very link, the very way these materials link permanently changes. So it sort of forces and reforces you into this position of, you know, readjusting yourself and how to construct this relation actually, you know, narratively or by reading through it. Basically, it feels like a table where you all the time would move objects, you know, back and forth. And yeah, but
maybe we can just see another category, because that's also like this way of organizing stuff in categories is questionable. How do you categorize things, and why would you order them in certain ways? So it deals also with the impossibility and how it's sometimes feels nearly painful to put something in one, like to reduce it to this one thing. And so it's trying to expand on this. Also, the pictures, like in the beginning, I was very simply photographing them on white, you know, like this. Oh yeah, okay, I'm black and white, so you don't see it. But anyway, so yeah, and then yes, here's the lemon, but it's black and white. But yes, okay, well, there we go. So it was photographed in color, and then it looked so much like advertisement. We can go back to the website maybe. That I decided I'm looking for another kind of image and another way of looking at these objects, also that leave more space for projection. Yeah, and so shadows has also been a lot of. I've worked with shadows a lot, which we haven't talked about.
Well, there's a beautiful film project also, Circle Square. It's the title. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, something to discover as well. Yeah, no, it's very. I mean, it's there are many interesting questions to that. It's also, I mean, one thing is that you can endlessly navigate, of course, these relations, but then. And this is a question if we talk about archives and the enactment or reenactment of archives is also maybe a nice question for the end of this talk. Also, like, how do you stop to? No, it's true. It's
well, for the moment, it's also there's actually a curfew here. So, and I'm not home yet. So
yeah, that's we should stop. We should stop, even if it's hard to stop. Yeah, thank you very much, Eva, for your being there and for your willingness to discuss and to show those materials. It's really great that that you shared all this. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next works, and I really recommend to everybody to check out the website. That's really something you can access, and it's I think it's in terms of getting into your work, it's a really beautiful tool actually. Your work saying also as a collective, people. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Eva, and get home before you get caught by somebody.
Thanks a lot. It was really nice to be part of this.
And, thank you. Thanks, Pampon, also for the usual mastery of all the editing and background things. And yeah, see you all soon. Bye bye.
Ciao. Bye. Ciao.